Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now, the Gauteng Education Department says it will intensify its Operation Vala Programme targeting bogus schools. The department recently closed down one Zimbabwean-owned school in Tembisa that had had been operating since 2018. Last year, former Gauteng Education MEC Panyaza Lesufi shut down about 20 other unregistered schools. Let's speak now to the head of education in Gauteng, Mosuwe. Thank you very much, Mr. Mosuwe, for your time here on all angles. Firstly, could this also be an even bigger problem, a problem that South Africa already has in terms of immigration and the fact that, there's a couple of people living here illegally?
Thank you very much, Masego, for the opportunity. Look, you know that as the Education Department and Gauteng in particular, on an annual basis, we're getting a whole lot of people migrating into Gauteng. And maybe as we speak now, we know that we are also dealing with admissions into Gauteng, and we will be continuously making a move to place all of these learners as spaces become available. But we've also seen over the recent, and maybe in the last 10 years, we have seen an increase in the number of applications for establishment of independent schools in the province. And to that extent, where an application meets the requirements for registration, we have been able to provide. And let me also clarify, what does it take? Some of the elements that it takes for an independent school to be approved. First, when we establish an independent school, it must meet the minimum standards comparable to what you will find in a public institution. It must have, and among those is that it must have proper facilities that meet OHS requirements. It must have credible teachers that are registered with the South African Council of Educators, and it must have proper financial and governance management systems. So all of those different aspects become important. And what we have seen with bogus institutions, you find that these become backdoor institutions somewhere in the backyard of somebody else. And to that extent, we've always ensured where we get to know that there is a bogus school that is operating, we immediately send out a letter to that institution to tell them to close. We report that matter with the law enforcement agencies as well. And we also get the district to inform parents of learners that may have taken their children to those schools, bogus schools, to take their children out. So it's a combination of factors, but we do know that Gauteng has an inward migration that continues to happen. And for that reason, there is a need for space, but it does not encourage people to be placing young people in schools that are not registered. Neither does it call for these bogus institutions to be preying on unsuspecting people of our province.
But does immigration also contribute with this particular school? The recent one, for instance, finding that there were about, 70 or 170, I don't remember the number quite well, who had been going there. And it was found that it was children whose parents were illegally in the country. So my question is, does immigration and our problems in South Africa, or in Africa actually, in terms of immigration, contribute to what we're finding with bogus schools?
Look, Masego, let me indicate that we keep a record of all registered learners in our schools. And one of the issues that we also have, as an example, in our public school is that record, we also have noted that we also struggle with what you would call undocumented learners. So when any young person, and this is what we are trying to say to parents, if there are young people that need to go to school because they are of a school-going age, they may take them to our schools, and together with our Department of Home Affairs, we are able to assist them to gain access, get relevant documentation and related matters. What the Department of Education will not do is to also help people bridge the country's laws. And that is why we work with the Department of Home Affairs to ensure that these children that are of school-going age can have access to necessary documentation. Because remember, there may be people in our country who are asylum seekers. There may be people in our country who are in the country for legitimate reasons, but their stay in the country must be formalized and must be approved by the Department of Home Affairs before we in education can take them. Notwithstanding that they are in our country, we will always insist and make sure that they have the necessary documentation, and hence our relationship and our collaboration with the Department of Home Affairs to ensure that they meet the requirements as laid out in the laws of our country.
And maybe for some of them, they're too scared to ask for assistance, and maybe some of them, as you said, are legitimately in this country, but they're too afraid to ask for assistance because they're scared that they'll be deported, and South Africa was basically their last hope. But also, is it not also an indication of desperation by parents? Because surely it cannot only be people who have migrated to South Africa who find themselves having their children go to bogus schools. Maybe even South Africans, like you're saying, there's still the placement of grade 1s and 8s. A large number still needing to be displaced in the province of Gauteng because of our population. Maybe some parents are so desperate to make sure that come the 18th of January when schools reopen, my child has to be at a school somewhere. So don't you think that there's also desperation there as well? Some parents probably not even having access to the internet to be able to do the grade 1 and 8 applications on the net.
Fair points you raise, Maseho, but we want to say two wrongs don't make a right. Firstly, if you don't have documentation, we have a relevant government department to assist. Two, we also want to discourage parents from registering their children in schools that or bogus institutions that allege to be or purport themselves to be registered schools. That is why we have a register of independent schools. And maybe at this point, we should then say, we encourage parents that if they were to take their children to independent schools, please make sure that they would look into the department's register of accredited and registered independent schools, because it is only those institutions that are on our approved list that qualify, and we know that they can be accounted for, in that they are meeting the minimum standards. But the other issue that you are raising about that they may also not have access to the admission systems, remember, and that is where additional information can be obtained. Not only have we established, we say people must use the online system, but they can also go to our 15 district offices that are located across the province. And we also had established over 40 walk-in sites or centers in the province, in the 15 districts, where parents can also apply for their learners. And it is in this context that we say government has made available sites and areas where information can be obtained, so that our people also do not fall prey to the bogus institutions and those people that may be wanting to take advantage of them because they may be finding themselves in a desperate situation.
And I think you make important points in terms of what parents should be looking out for when they take their kids to these independent schools. And just lastly, Mr. Mosuwe, why do you think it's so easy? I mean, I don't know how it looks statistically in other countries. At the moment, the stats that I do have is the ones here in our country, and particularly in Gauteng, with Panyaza Lesufi, or former Panyaza Lesufi, closing down 20 last year, for instance. Why do you think, or what is research showing you and investigations showing you about why South Africa is it's so easy in South Africa to be able to even open a bogus education institution?
Look, at this point in time, we do know that there have been many informal settlements being established, but we also equally know that there may be in certain areas where settlements may have been established. We have found it very difficult to, there may not be in the public schools in the immediate vicinity, but we do know that the department provides for scholar transport and all related matters when parents have come. So in other words, while there may be this expansion or increase in informal settlements, and there may not be adequate number of schools in those settlements, but what we do know is that government has also made available support to make sure that where there are no schools, we are able to transport learners. I can indicate to you now that we are transporting over 152,000 young people across Gauteng as a means of ensuring that the constitutional requirements and basis for giving them access is provided for. And that is why, Mosuwe, we would always encourage parents, do not take your children to bogus schools. Do not take your children to schools that are not registered. And if any member of the community knows of a school that is operating in our province that does not meet the minimum requirements, report it to the nearest district office, report it to the department. We will make sure that we close that school, because our role and responsibility as government and as a department is to make sure that all of our people are protected from these bogus institutions, because our mandate is to provide for quality education. We must make sure that we meet our constitutional obligations, and that is why it's important that we must also get a vigilant community out there to help us report on this matter.